A very warm welcome to everybody joining us here today from wherever you are in the world. My name is Sheen Towers. I'm currently the Director of Studies for the Metropolitan College of the SRAA, College Number 1. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you for the first meeting of January 2024. I just want to say hello to Brig. Very good to see you, Brig. As ever, Happy New Year to you. And yeah, today we have, for our first presentation of 2024, we have Dr. David Harrison. Could you give us a wave, please, David? Yeah, and you're joining us from, where was it? You said Warrington, isn't it?
Warrington in Cheshire.
Okay. And so, yeah, David is going to be giving a presentation on the early life and influences of John Yarker, who was an esoteric Freemason. And I very much look forward to your presentation, David. As ever, all of these meetings are recorded and the recordings are duly uploaded to the SRIA London YouTube channel. So do you need any screen sharing, David, for this?
No, I'm fine. I'll just be presenting the paper. I've got some photographs that I could search out later on, during any questions.
Yes.
But yeah, just the paper.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the usual format is the presentation takes place and then we open up to questions.
Great, fantastic.
That's great. So I'm just going to pin your screen to the main screen that's being recorded.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to mute everybody else. So please be aware, if you want to speak, you'll need to unmute yourselves. And then once you have spoken, everyone, please could you mute yourselves once again, just so that it doesn't interrupt the flow of the dialogue we're having. So let's see. David, you're going to need to unmute yourself once I've done this.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There you go. So David, there we are, that's it. And I'm just going to pin your image to the screen and that's all ready to go. So over to you, Dr. David Harrison.
Right, thank you very much. So the paper I'll be giving today is about John Yarker, a Freemason and occultist from Swindale, Cumbria. And this is, just as a means of introduction, this is part of a larger project, a biography that I'll be doing on John Yarker, which will be published sometime early this year. And so I'll get straight into it. So John Yarker, 1833 to 1913, was a Victorian occultist, Freemason, and esoteric truth seeker, who is now revered by esoteric Freemasons and in occultic circles. He authored many articles, short papers and books that now fetch large sums at auctions. He also collected a number of Masonic and Oriental orders and was said to have been the linchpin for Aleister Crowley's occult-orientated Ordo Templi Orientis, which secured his occult status. Yarker was based in leafy suburban Withington on the southern edge of Manchester for most of his career, though he was born near Shap, and this paper examines his early origins in Cumbria. Before, at the age of 7, he moved with his family to Rawtenstall and then to Manchester, and discusses possible influences on his life and work. So, John Yarker Jr. was born in Swindale in the windswept dales of East Cumbria on the 17th of April, 1833, and was baptised in St Michael's Church in nearby Shap 4 days later. His parents, John Yarker Sr. and Anne Nee Fell, came from established Westmoreland families. John Sr. was born in Askham in 1809, the son of Thomas Yarker, and Anne was the daughter of John Fell, a farmer of Swindale. And they married at Shap on the 23rd of June, 1832. And John then relocated 8 miles south of Askham to Swindale. By the time their first son, John, was born the following April, the small farming community would have been busy with the lambing. In the Transactions of the Cumberland and Westmoreland Antiquarian and Archaeological Society, Volume 1, in 1901, Swindale is described by the Reverend Joseph Whiteside as a picturesque valley that lies among our mounting fastness concealed. It is 4.5 miles by road from Sharp, but only 3 as the crow flies. And there are now only 3 inhabited houses with a population of 13, namely Swindale Head, Truss Gap, and Swindale Foot. 50 years ago, there were 13 inhabited houses with a population of about 45. And some of these houses are now in ruins, others are adapted for farm purposes. In one of these remote farmhouses, John Yarker Jr. was born, though he left the area while still a child. He stated on his family tree that he removed into Lancashire in 1840, and his family left the wild and romantic Cumbrian dales to settle eventually in one of the largest and most heavily industrialised towns in Victorian England, Manchester. The celebrated antiquary John Hodgson was also born in Swindale on the 4th of November 1779, being baptised in Sharp 9 days later. He described the valley with fondness, and this is a direct quote from Hodgson: Swindale to me, wild and craggy as it is, was and continues to be, in my remembrance and affections, one of the dearest spots upon earth. I knew every rock and frowning precipice in it, from the Druid Stone to the black and precipitous front of Wallow Crag. His affection for the place of his childhood remained so strong that he made great efforts to revisit Swindale several times before he died in 1845. It is indeed still a place of great beauty, the valley still being isolated and difficult to reach in the deep snows of winter. As well as being a smallholder in the valley, John Yarker Sr. found work as a schoolmaster, and there was a schoolhouse attached to Swindale Chapel, the records showing that only a small number of students attended, and the school catered only for the children of local families. The origins of the school can be traced to 1703, when Thomas Baxter of Truss Gap left an endowment for its establishment. There is an early reference to the chapel in 1728 and an undated letter which includes the signature of John Fell, John Yarker Jr.'s maternal grandfather, which was written in an effort to maintain finance for the school. The signatories included other prominent Swindale names such as James Sewell and Gerard Rose. At the turn of the 20th century, John Jr. corresponded with the Cumbrian historian and former vicar of Sharp, the Reverend Joseph Whiteside, who was quoted above. Whiteside included part of John Yarker's senior diary, which outlined daily life in Swindale and Sharp during 1840, in his book Sharp in Bygone Days, published in 1904. According to Whiteside, the school, which was on the western side of the chapel, had an average attendance of 3 scholars, and the schoolmaster was passing rich on £30 a year. Contrary to what John Yarker Jr. stated on his family tree, he is quoted in Whiteside's book as saying that his father was a resident in Swindale from the 1st of October 1829 to the 14th of June 1841. However, the 1841 census, which was taken on the 6th of June that year, shows that John Sr. and his family were by that time living at New Hall Hay near Rawtenstall in Lancashire. Excuse me. The move from Swindale to Rawtenstall was precipitate, and on his 31st birthday, on the 9th of June 1840, his diary states that John Sr. drew his half-year's salary of £12.10 as schoolmaster of Swindale. The next day, he applied for a new position as master of the National School in Rawtenstall, 15 miles north of Manchester. And the application was successful, and in his diary for the 13th of July 1840, he stated, "I sold my family, my household furniture, stock, and so forth today, turned over my farm to James Sewell to pay the full year's rent up to Whitsuntide next." On the 24th of July, he packed his goods to send them to Rawtenstall, and James Latin carried them to Kendal. Thus, the Yarker family moved from Swindale and down to Lancashire. Shap was a modest stopping off point for coaches, travelling from Scotland and Carlisle in the north, and from Kendal and Lancaster in the south. And there was a handful of inns and public houses and a church that served as a centre for the farming community surrounding the village. No evidence has yet come to light to suggest that John Yarker Sr. was a Freemason, although according to his diary, he was certainly well connected during his time in Swindale and Shap, and was part of the close social scene there. For example, on the 15th of February 1840, he visited the King's Arms in Shap with Thomas Clark, conducting a business meeting that resulted in him selling his red cow to Clark for £11. On the 21st of March, John Sr. records that he bought a gallon of whiskey from James Sewell, and then drank 2 bottles of gin with Roland Wilson at Mosedale Slate Quarry, before heading off to the Greyhound Inn in Shap. Afterwards, he went on to drink tea at the house of Thomas Cowart, a gamekeeper, with William Graham, and then took supper after calling in to see James Leighton and Thomas Rebanks. He notes that he finally made it home at 11:20 that evening. On several occasions in his diary, John Sr. mentions visiting James Sewell and the members of the Rose family to do business with them. These names are also found on the letter that was written in regards for financing the school, and they belong to long-standing families in Shap and the Swindale communities. Yarker Sr. weaves together the minute of everyday life in Swindale and Shap in his diary. Regarding the gossip of the community, he mentions how on the 1st of January 1840, while taking tea and supper with Richard Latin of Swindale Foot, he heard that a warrant had been issued against John Latin for sheep stealing. Later he notes that John Latin was tried on the 17th of February and was found guilty, being sentenced to 10 years transportation. John Sr. also records how on the 16th of March 1840, he shot a very splendid hawk on Outlet Crag Grain. It was stuffed in Shap and kept by the family, being presented in 1874 to Peel Park Museum in Salford. John Yarker Sr. was also a burgeoning writer, mentioning in his diary on the 21st of April 1840 how he had sent a letter to the Carlisle Patriot and the Kendal Gazette regarding a local fox hunt. His letters to local newspapers seem to have been fairly frequent. On the 6th of May, he records that he had read his paragraph in the Carlisle Patriot about the finding of a skeleton by one Joseph Lancaster of Shap. Life was hard at Swindale, and he writes of regular flooding during January 1840, with strong winds that damaged his house and that of his father-in-law John Fell. More flooding was recorded in February, and Swindale being exposed to the constant wet and windy weather that swept from down the mountains and through the valley, so that the school and chapel were frequently damp and cold, and the roads were constantly in bad condition. Indeed, Whiteside in his paper on Swindale Chapel quotes a piece from the Pall Mall Gazette of 1894, which describes the chapel as a poor little church, damp thanks to the southwest wind and its rain, and also to the clustering sycamores, which do their best to hide it. 10 pews or so, each adapted for about 4 persons of ordinary breadth, make up its complement. It has no lavish decoration, and indeed no decoration at all, except 3 or 4 faded, coarse little symbolic frescoes on its pallid walls, and a meagre beheading to the colour wash by the windows. There is an iron stove, the plainest of plain stone fonts, and a naked altar. The love that the congregation bear to such a building must be of the profound, the heartfelt kind. And there is not an aesthetic touch about the church at all. So the curate of Swindale Chapel at the time of John Yarker Sr.'s tenure as schoolmaster was one Stephen Walker. who had been licensed as curate on the 16th of March 1816 to assist Robert Walker, who had taken on the position the year before. Stephen Walker took over completely in 1833 and continued in the role until his death in 1850. He was said to have lived from house to house, as the old parsonage had become derelict, and carried with him a box of sermons, and commonly took one off the top each Sunday. His sermons seemed to have become quite repetitive, and old Mrs. Sewell of Swindale Head remonstrated and exhorted him to stir up that box, as they're become very thick. On one occasion, John Yarker Sr. accidentally broke the bottle of wine to be used for the Holy Communion, and rum was used in its place. When Yarker Sr. left the school, he was replaced by Stephen Walker and then by Thomas Sewell, who died in 1870 and was buried by the door of the church in Shap. Having a schoolmaster as a father would certainly have assisted Yarker, John Yarker Jr., his education, and his ability to translate from French and to write confidently, though in a typically early 19th century style, is probably part of this legacy. Another early memory of Swindale that Yarker Jr. recalled in his correspondence with Whiteside was something that might well have helped to inspire him, and developed a keen interest in ghosts and spirits. The legend of Wicked Jimmy. This was the name given to a local landowner called James Lowther, who was the first Earl of Lonsdale, who, as the name suggests, had a bad reputation in life. Excuse me. After his death, it was believed that he drove headless horses furiously through the grounds. And indeed, Yarker wrote of how his father knew men who were prepared to swear that they had opened the gate for him, as Wicked Jimmy rode by wildly with his ghostly headless steeds. However, Yarker also recited a story that portrays a kinder side to Wicked Jimmy. Two members of the Yarker family, John and Robert, ran away to Gretna, just over the border in Scotland, with the daughters of the steward of James Lowther. And on their return, they were immediately married again at Ascot Church. The locals, however, were afraid to take them in for fear of reprisals, apart from a certain Margaret Walker of Wales, whose husband owned his own estate and who cared nought about the Lowthers. James Lowther, contrary to his wicked reputation, sent for the steward, telling him to forgive his daughters and that he would provide for the husbands. And John was subsequently put into the customs at Maryport, and Robert became an assistant paymaster of the forces. Whiteside also describes other hauntings around Shap and Swindale, in particular the apparition of a dobby or bogey that appeared as a large black dog. When seen, was said to be a harbinger of death. Indeed, tales of hauntings and witches were commonplace in the area. Mary Baines, the witch of Tebay, south of Shap, was said to be able to foretell the future and cast spells. The antiquary John Hodgson, born in Swindale, returned in his final years to partake of the Shap wells and their salutary power, and to muse among the druidical stones. Westmoreland and Cumberland abounded with myths and legends, which were extensively repeated in the 19th century literature. Indeed, Yarker wrote a short article for the February 1880 edition of the Theosophist, entitled English Ghost Stories, which is filled with the stories of ghostly hauntings that he had heard as a child while living in Swindale. Most of the stories involve his family, though he states that they were never regular churchgoers apart from attending baptisms, weddings and funerals, and were thus not very likely to be spiritually superstitious. He failed to mention that his father was mastering a school attached to a chapel and knew the curate well, and later became a scripture reader, though he did refer to his family connection with the Leyburn family of Yorkshire. A particular ghost story that Yarker recited involved his grandfather, who during the time of the expected Napoleonic invasion had to visit Penrith after being conscripted as a soldier. Yarker writes that he had two choices. He could either serve in the army himself, or he could provide a substitute. On arriving in Penrith, he met and purchased a recruit in his place. Riding home through Lowther Park, the grandfather witnessed the ghost of a neighbour, a woman dressed in an antiquated costume, who disappeared, dissolving before his eyes. He rushed home and went straight to bed, leaving the door unlocked. And after telling his wife about the encounter with the apparition, both were too frightened to get out of the bed and lock the door. Yarker mentions that his father added to the story somewhat, stating that his grandfather had probably drunk a few glasses in the Penrith Inn while seeking his recruit. He also related a story whereby his father knew of a man who would stop every time he passed a certain field gate, losing his composure, swearing that he saw something, and shouting in horror. Shouting, "There they are, see over there, see." Perhaps it was Wicked Jimmy again and his headless horde. Another ghostly tale involved Yarker's grandmother, who had lost her 14-year-old daughter and was grief-stricken. While she was lying on a bed, fretting and perfectly awake, her daughter appeared to her, laid a cold hand upon her brow, and said, "Do not grieve for me, mother, as I am very happy." After the vision, Yarker's grandmother grieved no more. A similar story was told in the article of a Wesleyan woman whom Yarker knew in the village he lived in as a boy. She had likewise lost a daughter and grieved for her. And on one occasion, the woman fell upon the floor in grief and prayed to God to allow her to see her daughter just one more time. While in the midst of her prayer, her daughter suddenly appeared before her in a great radiance and beauty, and the mother from that day became reconciled to her loss. As Yarker stated at the end of the article, the relation thereof by truthful people in my childhood formed in after years a little oasis in my desert of unbelief in the supernatural. Ghost stories aside, Whiteside was full of praise for John Yarker Jr. for allowing him to have a glimpse into the mid-century life of Swindale through the lens of his father's diary. He said that Yarker was an enthusiastic antiquary of much repute, and that honour may be properly given to John Yarker of Withington near Manchester, who was born in Swindale on the 17th of April 1833. He's a learned antiquary who is unselfishly willing to communicate the results of his researches to others who make use of them. A full account of him must be sought on pages 41 and 42 of Genealogy of the Surname Yarker, which was published in 1882. And despite the harsh life in the valley, Yarker seems to have had a fondness for his early childhood in Swindale. So now we'll come to the move to Rawtenstall, Manchester and Salford. So John Yarker Jr. was 7 years old when he moved to Newhall Hay, near Rawtenstall, on his father's appointment to the National School. Yarker Sr. had heard of the position through corresponding with the Reverend Thomas Sewell, who was based in Haslingden. And as we have seen, in July 1840, he and his family moved to Rawtenstall, a small but growing manufacturing town in Rossendale. Cotton weaving and the production of footwear were the principal industries. The National School, later St Mary's School, was opened in 1826. And in 1838, the Reverend William Whitworth became the first vicar of St Mary's Church, Rawtenstall. We see how a small number of leading families were involved in the development of the community here, and the Hoyle and Hardman families were central to the growth of Rawtenstall and the surrounding area, especially in education and in other philanthropic pursuits. One of the people who interviewed Yarker Sr., for the position of master of the National School was a Mr. Hardman, who was probably George Hardman, a woolen manufacturer and a partner in Newhall Hay Mill, who was the first owner of Oak Hill Mansion, built in 1840. And John Yarker Sr. seems to have found himself well placed yet again. However, by 1851, the family had moved once more and were living in the working class area of Reither Street, which was between Rochdale Road and Oldham Road in northeast Manchester. The father's occupation, which was given in the census, was scripture reader. This was in many ways a hard job, but it could be quite rewarding. A scripture reader's duty was to read from the Old and New Testaments, going from house to house and searching out the most destitute and ignorant of the parishes. He was appointed by the bishop and was under the direction of the local clergyman, effectively giving an increased means of parochial efficiency. And in the mid-19th century, the annual salary of a scripture reader might be around £50 to £70, which was much more than Yarker Senior would have earned as a schoolmaster in either Swindale or in Rawtenstall. There might have been more money, but life in working class Manchester was hard, and disease was commonplace. And in 1853, John Senior's second son, Thomas Fell Yarker, died, and a year later, John's wife followed. Within 3 years of her death, however, John Senior had remarried to Jane Lawson and settled in Salford. The 1861 census records John and Jane living in the more prosperous area of Claremont Road in Pendleton. He was still working as a scripture reader, and his sons from his first marriage had by this time left home, although John was to have 2 more sons with his new wife, Thomas, who was born in 1864, and Reginald in 1867. John Yarker Senior died on the 3rd of February, 1875, aged 66. According to his will, he had moved from Salford to Emmett Street, which was near Reither Street, just north of Oldham Road, on the north side of Manchester, and had moved yet again, just before his death, to Oakfield Terrace, Windsor Bridge in Salford. John Yarker Senior had been working as a mercantile clerk at the time of his death, and he was an intelligent man, and he could adapt and find reasonably well-paid work, which placed him in the lower middle-class stratum of society. Indeed, as the historian E.J. Hobsbawm noted of late 19th century Salford, that class was reckoned to include commercial travellers, clerks, lithographic printers, joiners, and cabinet makers. According to his probate grant, John Yarker Senior left effects of less than £100, and 2 of his executors were from the same lower middle class stratum. James Ralph, a cashier of 14 Bland Street, Hume, and John Nicholson, a commercial traveller from Withington. The Hume district of Manchester included Chawton Road, where John Yarker Jr. was then living, and Withington is where he went to live a couple of years after his father's death. John Senior left all his effects and money in trust to his 2 younger sons from his second marriage to Jane Lawson. She had died a few years before in 1872, and their youngest son, Reginald, died a year after his father in 1876. And Reginald was buried in the nearby Wees Cemetery in Salford, a short distance from the resting place of John Yarker Jr.'s infant son, who had died in 1862. At the southern end of Claremont Road, where John Yarker Senior once lived, is Wees Lane, which eventually leads to Wees Cemetery. Just off Wees Lane, near Liverpool Street, was the mill, which was part owned by the father of philosopher and political theorist Frederick Engels. Engels said he had walked through the Manchester cotton mills and slums, doing the research and investigation for his groundbreaking work, The Condition of the Working Class in England, written during his stay in the area during 1842 to 1844. The industrial landscape of Salford during this period was dominated by the mills that made the area a leading centre of cotton spinning production, with much poor quality housing, poverty and disease. Salford had quays and wharfs on the River Irwell, which was linked to the Mersey and the Irwell navigation, with the Mersey estuary being 35 miles to the west And by this time, there was also a well-connected rail network. However, in 1873, there began a long depression, greatly exasperating the social and economic problems of Salford. Within this industrial and economic landscape, John Yarker Jr. developed his professional acumen as an agent. And in 1856, he had become a Freemason. He joined the Manchester-based Jerusalem encampment a little later. His occupation was given as accountant and agent, and he was therefore using his talent for bookkeeping, organisation, communication, and sales, something that would hold him in good stead during his later independent Masonic years. As we shall see, he conducted an extensive correspondence during his time at the head of his various Masonic rites and orders, and he was an excellent communicator, managing to gain trust and to obtain access to people in various Masonic and professional circles. And John Yarker Jr. had joined Freemasonry in 1854 and had married in 1857. And this was the beginning of a new journey for him, a journey that would lead him to some intriguing places. Now we come to a piece that describes Freemasonry in the 19th century. And John Yarker Jr. joined Freemasonry at a point when it was gaining popularity and was back in vogue amongst the middle classes. In the early 19th century, Freemasonry had entered a period of decline, especially in the industrial towns of northwest England. The decades after the Napoleonic Wars had seen widespread protest in some industrial towns. We have the Peterloo Massacre of 1819 in Manchester, and riots in Stockport in 1842 and 1852. And they're just a few examples of what was going on in regards to rioting and rebellions in the Northwest. Within Freemasonry, there were disputes and fractures. And there had been a Masonic rebellion in Liverpool in 1823. And subsequently, an independent Grand Lodge was formed in Wigan. Elsewhere, stagnation and decline can be seen in lodges in various industrial towns, such as in the Lodge of Lights in Warrington, the Lodge of Friendship in Oldham, and the Lodge of St. John in Stockport, all of which had a notable working class element during the early part of the 19th century. By the 1850s, however, there was a marked resurgence in Freemasonry, not only in its membership, but also in its makeup, with charismatic industrialists and leaders of the community joining the ranks, such as the industrialist Sir Gilbert Greenall, who joined the Lodge of Lights, the schoolmaster Isaac Gatskill, who rejuvenated the Lodge of Friendship, and the Reverend John Crennel, who revitalised the Lodge of St. John. These influential gentlemen attracted an influx of middle-class members into a society that now offered a glittering networking nexus. And in Lancashire, there was a revitalised provincial leadership, which as early as 1826 had divided up the original large provinces into western and eastern divisions. Among the provincial leadership of northwest England were aristocratic figures such as the war hero Viscount Cumbria, a friend of the Duke of Wellington, who became provincial Grand Master for Cheshire in 1830. Lord de Tabley and members of the Tatton Egerton family were provincial Grand Masters in the Cheshire province in the later 19th century. And in Wales, Sir Watkin William Wynne served as provincial Grand Master. Lancashire also had aristocratic provincial Grand Masters, such as the Earl of Latham, who was a popular provincial Grand Master for West Lancashire, so much so that it was declared in an edition of the Freemason in 1898 that the lodges in his province had very nearly doubled since his formal installation in the office in 1873. Not to be outdone, the 17th Earl of Derby was installed as Provincial Grand Master of the Eastern Division of Lancashire in 1899 at the Free Trade Hall in Manchester, also becoming a popular Masonic leader, with the number of lodges increasing from 113 to 303 during his 49-year tenure. With this revitalising of Freemasonry came more organised charitable incentives, such as the East Lancashire Systematic Masonic Educational and Benevolent Institution, which was formed in 1876. Education and charity in the community emerged as a focus for Freemasonry, and local lodges became directly involved in the establishment of local libraries, the building of schools and centres of education. In short, Freemasonry was actively and directly taking part in the improvement of society. This was the Freemasonry that John Yarker Jr. entered, and Yarker was indeed the perfect candidate. He was a young and intelligent, up-and-coming member of the professional classes. He had promising prospects and far-reaching potential. However, Yarker wanted more from his Freemasonry, and his insatiable desire for the esoteric and his almost obsessive interest in the high degrees put him on a collision course with regular Freemasonry, a course that would ultimately push his Masonic career in a completely different direction. Yarker soon joined other Masonic orders, such as the Royal Arch, Mark Masonry, and, as we've just seen before, the Knights Templar. But he departed from most of these orders when he suddenly left the craft in 1862. Indeed, 1862 was a hard year for Yarker. His infant son died, and the cotton industry in the northwest of England was suffering due to the American Civil War. And Yarker, a young family man now based in the cotton-producing centre of Manchester, would have been deeply affected by both events. However, there is no evidence that these affected his decision to leave active mainstream Freemasonry. But he was soon to leave his lodge, his Royal Arch chapter, and his Mark Lodge far behind, after an initial period of rather intense activity. Yarker then embarked on a more esoteric journey, becoming involved in more exotic Masonic orders, such as the Ancient and Primitive Rite, of which he eventually became Grand Hierophant. The Oriental-themed Sat Baha'i, the Swedenborgian Rite, the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, and the ancient order of Zuzzamites. It was this esoteric activity that he was to be remembered for, and after his death at his home in Withington in 1913, his esoteric orders became much sought after. Yarker had developed a friendship with occultist Aleister Crowley in the years before his death, Crowley gaining access into some of his orders, and thus Yarker is now considered to be a vital influence on the Ordo Templi Orientis, an order that is famed for its connection to Crowley. As the 20th century progressed, Yarker's name became attached to what became known as the Pansophic Rites, a collection of esoteric, Templar and Masonic rites that formed under a Gnostic bishop based in London by the name of Richard Duke de Palatin. Some of these rites and orders are still being practiced today and still proudly celebrate Yarker's connection to them. Yarker also embraced spiritualism and began to research other occult topics such as magnetic magic, commenting on alchemy, and exploring ancient religions. His published work, which was an outlet for his researches, culminated in his magnum opus, The Arcane Schools, in 1909. His later life in Manchester seemed far away from his upbringing in rural Swindale, but his memories of his time as a young boy, surrounded by the ghost stories, the druid stones and healing, surely inspired his later interests in esoterica and the occult. His early life, encircled by the ghosts and legends of Swindale, as seen in his recital of stories in the Theosophists, and his interest in spirits and elementals conveyed in works such as The Assistant Genies and Irreconcilable Gnomes, or Continuation to the Gabale, which he translated and wrote the introduction for, put forward an interest in the supernatural that may well have begun in those windswept dales of Cumbria, a place that he never forgot. So thank you very much for listening. That's the conclusion of the paper, and I'll turn it over now for any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, David, for that. I'm just going to unpin you from the main screen here and put everything on speaker view. Just 1 second, please. So yes, thank you very much, David. That was a very obviously thoroughly researched paper about his history, John Yarker's history. You must have spent a long time working on that. So I'd like to open this up for any questions anyone may have, please, for David. If you do have questions, it's very helpful for me if you, in the reactions tab at the bottom of the screen, just raise your hand and then I'll be able to see who's who. So Kristen, thank you, Kristen. Over to you.
There we go. Okay, so I'm relatively new here. I was just wondering, I had never heard of this man. Is he very well known in the UK or in Rosicrucian or Freemason circles?
Yeah, well, John Yarker is quite famous in these kind of circles. Even in the US, really, he's he's remembered for quite a few things. Mainly his orders his esoteric orders that he collected together after leaving Freemasonry or craft Freemasonry in 1862. I should rephrase that. Maybe I should say active Freemasonry, craft Freemasonry. But he had a numerous collection of orders: ancient primitive rite, the Sat Baha'i, Swedenborgian rite, Zosimites. He was involved in the Society of Eight, many orders, and so he's famous for those. He's also...
Are you saying that he began or was one of the initiators of the South Baha'i?
He got connected to it, yeah, and he was certainly one of the early members. So yeah, he was involved in that. He was yeah. Oh, I could be here all day listening to all the orders he was involved with. Quite a lot of them, and a lot of them still survive to this day, which was interesting as well to find out about. So the biography that I did of him is actually called The Life and Death of John Yarker, because he became even more interesting in the time after his death, really. It was also linked to Crowley towards the end of his days as well. The last few years of his life, he connected himself to Aleister Crowley, and Aleister Crowley indeed took over the reins of the ancient and primitive rite at one stage. So yeah, it's studying John Yarker is a journey in itself, really. So I'm hoping to bring John Yarker to people like yourself that may not be too familiar with him.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Nakeem. Hello, Nakeem. Welcome. Over to you, sir.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Good evening. I have a question regarding John Yarker in terms of him detracting from regular masonry, or what we call in the U.S. excuse me, what we call in the U.S. mainstream masonry. Question: what I understand is that the 33 degrees that consist of the Rite of Memphis from 4 to 96. What I understand, and he had 97, is that those 33 degrees were abstracts from mainstream masonry. And because of that, he was suspended indefinitely from regular masonry. That's one question. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, what was he suspended in the US, or when he left? Yeah, when he left regular Freemasonry, in 1862, or active Freemasonry. He just embarked on this career with all these kind of orders, esoteric orders, the Ancient and Primitive Rite, which is basically a condensed version, the 33 degrees of all the Memphis Mizraim condensed together. He eventually became Grand Hierophant of that, but he was never suspended as such in England. He was still actually involved in some research lodges. He was part of the correspondence circle of Quater Coronati when that developed in the 1880s, and he was also an honorary member of the Manchester Association of Masonic Research as well. So there are hints that he might have actually visited some regular, shall we say, craft lodges as well. One in Liverpool, because he actually got close to a lot of people in Liverpool from the middle classes, solicitors and other writers. William Quilliam was one of his close associates, who was a solicitor from Liverpool, and a couple of writers as well that he knew. And he visited a lodge in Liverpool. I suspect there's evidence for it, and there's also a visit to a Mart Lodge much later on that was resurrected by the writer John Armstrong. He did hold a very kind of light connection, you know, to regular Freemasonry, shall we say. Was never really suspended as such, but his name became connected to these orders. And in America, there was, I know the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, I'm just working off memory now, the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts put down, I don't know if it was an edict or something like that, or some kind of rule about the operations of some of these lodges, some of these kind of other orders that they deemed as unmasonic. So and obviously his name was connected to these, but he wasn't suspended as such. So he was still actually viewed as, you know, as a Freemason that could, you know, come back to a lodge at any time, you know, a regular lodge, really. And indeed, there's evidence that he possibly did in Liverpool.
Okay, so I guess what my conclusion with that will be, definitely Europe, he's acknowledged, but I will say in the U.S., because that's called Memphis, right? And Memphis Mizraim are considered what other pike terms in the U.S. conspirious Freemasonry, right? So
yeah,
you cannot.
Well, Yarker did have a few words with Albert Pike. They did have this kind of how am I going to put it? Like yeah, they didn't really like each other, I don't think. You know, they there was a famous pamphlet that was published, and Yarker responded to it. So yeah, there was this kind of tit for tat going on with Yarker and Pike, an episode, shall we say? And so yeah, that kind of view was occurring there, you know, during that particular time as well. You know, with the ideas of regular Freemasonry and, you know, what I suppose we'd call today as clandestine or whatever, or, you know, right. and this kind of Memphis Mizraim, this view on Memphis Mizraim, which obviously was seen as something that would come into conflict with the Scottish Rite, you know. So yeah, there was many different things forming at this time, many different ideas, and Yarker, of course, was he visited America. This is where he got the ancient and primitive rite from. You know, from a group of people in New York. Brought it back over to England and started it here. You know, and he gathered his friends around him and his colleagues and other interested parties that wanted to follow, you know, an esoteric pathway, really. And this is how he kind of made it popular during his lifetime.
You said that York got it. You said John Yarker got his rights from Memphis. That is from the U.S.
Yeah, the ancient and primitive rite. Yeah.
Because the only one during that time was McConaughey.
Just after, I believe. McConaughey has been described as Yarker's mentor in a way. Yeah, because he looked at Marconis as you know, as coming up with some good ideas in regards to esoteric Freemasonry. You know, some of his work was used by Yarker.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yes, I'm a great hire for here in the U.S. Nonetheless, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nakeem. It's good to see you. Brig, over to you, please.
Thank you, Shane. David, fascinating paper about a fascinating character. And my brain's racing here because I know a little bit about dear Aleister Crowley. But the question it comes in my head, it would appear that Yarker's interest in the esoteric was stimulated through Freemasonry. But why did he, do you think, decided to embrace esotericism and leave craft Freemasonry? Was it because craft Freemasonry, rather like today, just didn't acknowledge esotericism?
Yeah, I mean, Yarker, you got to excuse me. I've had a cold for the past week, so my voice has been. I get gravelly sometimes here now. But yeah, the Yarker constantly writes about in the context of what can be referred to as knife and fork Freemasonry. And there's a fantastic quote. I wish I had it here now. It's on my computer though, but it means we're going into it. But I'm paraphrasing now. But basically, he wrote about how craft Freemasonry was filled with gentlemen that wanted jewels and you know, fancy aprons and things like that. You know, they were seeking the more kind of materialistic essence of knife and fork Freemasonry. You know, dining just to kind of network and to you know, to get fancy provincial aprons and to get jewels and that wasn't for him. And I think what happened with Yarker was he got bored of that quite quickly. He saw something much deeper in Freemasonry as a gateway to what we can refer to as the esoteric, and he wanted more of that. And what I was discussing in the paper was that perhaps he remembers his childhood from the windswept dales of Cumbria and all these ghost stories of Wicked Jimmy and these witches and druidical stones and healing wells and all these other ghosts that he obviously wrote about in articles later on. And when he got involved, you know, in spiritualism and magnetic magic and all these other things as well, smoking marijuana and you know, he was constantly searching for something. And when you read his works, you can see that coming out of his his commentary, you know, that he was constantly searching for something. So this seems to have driven Yarker, and indeed he was a driven man. You know, you can see that in his writings, in his work, in all these orders that he collected together. It was as if he was searching for something else. You know, so he'd try one esoteric order, then he'd get involved in another and another and another. He found like-minded people that he could correspond with in the Society of Eight, with Irwin and Kenneth Mackenzie and Frederick Hockley and people like that, Benjamin Cox, and he just went with it, you know. And I think normal, let's call it normal craft masonry, bored him. And I think the fact that he left in 1862, I mean, that's when his infant son died, and there was this big economic downward spiral, you know, as well, you know, with the American Civil War and the cotton famine and all this kind of stuff, you know, affecting the, you know, the economy of Manchester. It's a pretty dreadful year for Yarker. So, you know, that might have had something to do with it as well. But mainly, you know, his desire, his constant desire, his constant drive for what can be termed the esoteric, you know, I think that really pushed him away from Freemasonry. But yeah, you're right. I think he saw Freemasonry at first as this trigger, and it helped to trigger something inside of it. But he soon got bored of what was on the surface. He wanted to dig deeper. Yeah.
If David, he had been fortunate enough to rub shoulders with, for argument's sake, Manly P. Hall, Wilmshurst, JSM Ward, perhaps, yeah, you know, he would have found fellow travellers. Yeah,
well, in my biography of Yarker, I do put forward that Wilmshurst was perhaps inspired by Yarker. A bit later on, after Yarker's death, Wilmshurst did he did some writing for Yarker's old publisher, for example, and appeared to you know, to be aware of him in some respect. So and Yarker does use the terminology of the living stones. So you know, I do kind of push for that at the end, that perhaps Wilmshurst may have been inspired, you know, by Yarker. And of course Manly P. Hall, some of his work, you know, is if you read Yarker's Arcane Schools, there's work reflected in that, you know, with Manly P. Hall and other writers of the early 20th century, you know, other esoteric writers.
Many thanks, David.
Yeah, thank you. Good question.
I have a question for you, David, please. So you mentioned obviously that Yarker was involved with the SRIA. Do you know any more details about that involvement?
Yeah, he was involved in Lancashire College. Is it Lancashire College? Again, I'm working off memory. And he gave perhaps one of the best papers to it was in Sheffield. The name of the college eludes me at the moment, but it was an SRIA setting, and he did present this paper, and this paper's fantastic. And he goes on about the esoteric pathway and in essence all of his kind of ideas, really. He mentions Irwin, and he mentions Mackenzie and Hockley as well. And it's a really revealing paper. And I think it was from I'm just working off memory, because obviously the paper was, you know, the paper I just did was a bit before that. But yeah, in the 1880s, and it not only gives evidence that Yarker travelled as well, because obviously he was living in Withington in Manchester, South Manchester. He lived on Burton Road, right near a railway station. So he had fantastic access, and indeed he did travel a lot. You know, with his orders, he went to Liverpool a lot, Sheffield to give a paper for the SRIA, and Glasgow, London. You know, so he travelled in the UK quite extensively, really, and he also travelled to the US as well. You know, so he was traveling around a bit. But yeah, to go back to the original question, yeah, he was involved in the SRIA, and this.
Do you
this
know
of
what
course,
college?
lapsed on.
Do you know what college?
I think it was Lancashire College, which I believe is still going now. It's
Yes.
yeah, and they yeah, I think they had a little break for a while, and then they kind of resurfaced after a number of years, a short number of years, but effectively it's the same college, and I do believe they do have some of the old early papers and things like that, you know. So and that college I think covered Liverpool and Manchester and some other areas in the northwest. So yeah, you know, he was deeply involved in that, and it was right up Yarker Street, and also that crossed over to the Society of Eight, where he was corresponding with you know, like-minded gentlemen like himself, Irwin and Hockley and Kenneth Mackenzie, who were again, you know, quite you know, they were big heavyweights on the esoteric field, the occult revival at the time, you know. So yeah, you know, it was all happening at that time. It was all coming together for these like-minded people.
Thank you very much, David. Back over to you, Nakim.
Thank you. Three questions. One that's popped up. What you're speaking about at this time, David, is some of this material, is it in the book that you're preparing?
Well, yeah, it's done and dusted now. Yeah, it's coming out in April, May with Lewis Masonic. So yeah, it's a nice kind of thick biography of Yarker. Well, the title is Life and Death. You know, the life and death of John Yarker. So because he's still important to esotericists, and his orders are still going, you know, today. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, good, thank you. So look forward to getting that book as well. Second question, SRIA. I'm not a member, but I know in the Grand Lodge, New York, they have one in there, in America. Is there a connection between Yarker and the Illuminati, and the Illuminati in reference to its connection with SRIA, because SRIA and Illuminati at one point, I think it was the revision of the Illuminati, or it was the Bavarian one, the original one. There was a relationship at some point between the Illuminati and the Bavarian Rite, and there was an involvement between the Bavarian Rite, Illuminati, and SRIA, and so I wanted to know, was Yarker involved with the Illuminati? And you mentioned earlier Gnostic. I'm also a Gnostic bishop as well. So Papists, there's a connection between Gnostics. So what I know, Papa was also a member of the Illuminati. And when I say brothers and sisters, when I say Illuminati, I don't mean the conspiracy thing you're talking about. Illuminati only lasts like 10 years.
Crazy Illuminati. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the conspiracy Illuminati.
Yeah. Not that. You know, that's misunderstanding. So I say Illuminati, brothers and sisters, please don't misunderstand what I'm saying to you. Because the original one only lasted like 10 years. and right now it's under like different names right now. But anyway, three questions: MRI and MRIA and Illuminati. Was Yarker affiliated with Illuminati? And Yarker was a Gnostic, all right, I guess bishop, right? So that being the case, Pappas was definitely a member of also the Illuminati at that time. Was Yarker a member of the Illuminati?
No.
That
The Bavarian Illuminati is something completely different. That fizzled out during the French Revolution. I'm just working off memory here, but I think that's about right. It was around about that time when the Bavarian Illuminati fizzled out. However, Yarker and his cohorts were very much into spiritualism, and as a very popular Victorian pastime, really, spiritualism. But that's another story. But Yarker and his cohorts were very, very much interested in it, and they did form a society called Frater Lucis, which was quite a bizarre society because it included a number of past masters, shall we say, that had already passed away, and some of these included the likes of Count Cagliostro and Pasquale and people like this from the 18th century. These were these kind of like ghostly heavenly masters that excuse me, that kind of apparently through spiritualism conveyed the rituals of Frater Lucis over to F.G. Irwin, who then kind of passed them on to his cohorts, John Yarker and Kenneth Mackenzie, and so it kind of gets a bit blurred there. But yeah, to answer your question, Yarker wasn't a member of the Illuminati. The SRIA, of course, is completely different. That's
right. David, yes, I'm aware that for totally different.
Yeah.
I had documents that show that there was later on a relationship, but not with the original, maybe probably the revision ones, because the Bavarian lasted for like 10 years. It lasted, and then another revision, for the Illuminati.
What's
like
if I could butt in there as well to answer the other part of the question about the Gnostic bishops. They kind of developed a bit later on in the 20th century, and there's a lineage of Gnostic bishops that go back to probably the early part of the 20th century. And this lineage of Gnostic bishops, it was one of these Gnostic bishops called the Duke de Palatine, otherwise known as Ronald Powell, who collected together what became the Pansophic rites. And within these Pansophic rites was a number of Yarker orders, but he also had something called the Illuminati in there. So that was kind of connected, in a bit of a ethereal way, it was, but it's all a bit different. It's all a bit strange, and takes a lot of unpicking. But to answer your question, Yarker wasn't a member of the Illuminati at all. He was a member of loads of other orders, but not particularly that one. Yeah.
So they had been, all right, because Cagliostro, right? He was Illuminati. Saint Germain was Illuminati. Papa was Illuminati, right? So
the thing we're going off topic here in a bit, but I did do a book about the lost rites and rituals of Freemasonry, which came out about 6 or 7 years ago, and this does kind of examine these orders, these rites of the 18th century, and Cagliostro's featured in there. He was more of his own man, really. He created what was called the Egyptian rite of Cagliostro, the Cagliostro's Egyptian rite. It was and it was much more of his own kind of flamboyant style, you know, so partially based in Paris for a while, and then kind of moved on. But there was many different rites, you know, in the 18th century. The Varian Illuminati was just one of them, and but once that became defunct, you know, it kind of I think it has been resurrected in a certain style these days, but it's not you know, it's not connected, you know, really to the original. Yeah, I think with the word Illuminati, it's like I always see it as like an umbrella that captures many different things. You know, it captures the imagination more than anything. You know, hence the word's been adopted, and it's been transformed into this conspiracy ideal, and all, you know, all these people are members of it, and you know, it's a very attractive idea. You know, but when you pick it apart, there's nothing there. So, but yeah, I mean, Yarker wasn't a member of that at all.
David, what else do you know about some of the other orders that you mentioned? There was a name that after in your paper, after you mentioned the SRIA, it was something beginning with Z, was it?
Oh, the Ancient Order of Zuzzamites.
I've never heard of that. So do you know anything you can tell us about them?
Yeah, it's fantastic order that was. It was the person in control of that order really was Yarker's friend William Quilliam. And William Quilliam, again, was a fantastic character who was involved in Yarker's ancient primitive rite, Swedenborgian rite, many of the rites and orders. Really, he was involved in. He was from Liverpool, based in Liverpool. He was a solicitor, and he got into some trouble as a solicitor and had to leave the profession. And he went on the continent for a few years, you know, to kind of lay low for a while, I think, to clear his reputation. But when he was based in Liverpool and close to Yarker in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s as well, he took control of this order of Zuzzamites, the ancient order of Zuzzamites, which Yarker was involved with. And it's a very complex ritual, which has been published by the Grand College of Rites a number of years ago. And I have seen extracts from original writings. You know, it's very kind of complicated. And I did write an article about it once, and it was so complicated we kind of just told the story of it really. But they used to have these annual sojourns, and they met in Southport, they met in Chester, and these annual sojourns seems to be an excuse for a bit of a, you know, drinking session with the guys, you know. And but there were quite a few people involved from Yarker's circle, some from Liverpool as well, and they did meet, you know, for a while, and a lot of these orders kind of crossed over to other orders as well. So obviously William Quilliam, you know, was a member of other orders, and another guy from the Zuzzamites was called Henry Hawley, and he was a member of other orders as well, Yarker's orders. So they were all in it together, so to speak, you know. And so the Zuzzamites crossed over to the Swedenborgian rite, which crossed over to the ancient and primitive rite, which crossed over to the Sat Baha'i and other rites as well. So it seemed that these guys were quite close and were, you know, meandering through different orders and rites, you know. But the rites were great. They were fantastic kind of order, you know.
It's a very unusual name. You say Zuzzamites. Do you have any idea about the origin of that order and the origin of or meaning of that name?
Yeah, it's biblical. as were some of the other orders that they created, like the Order of Elijah and the Hermetic Brother of Egypt was another one. In fact, if you just bear with me just 1 second, I will just get something. Just bear with me. I'm back. Right. Yeah, I published this a few months ago, the Hermetic Brothers of Egypt.
Yes.
It's only a short book, but along with the Zuzzamites, Kenneth Mackenzie and John Yarker used to basically write these orders. They created them. They'd search into the biblical world, shall we say, the Old Testament in particular, and create these titles. And there's a couple of orders. The Order of Elijah was one of them, and had the Hermetic Brothers of Egypt, which were basically just titles. And these titles just appeared in the writings of Kenneth Mackenzie and in John Yarker's journal, which he started to publish, which was called the Neth. And they'd just be titles, and that was it. And then they'd disappear. We've not been able to find any kind of remnants of these. So I was. This is just a side story, by the way. But I was researching, the Zuzzamites, and it's the ritual for that is very complex. And I thought, how did they write these rituals? This must have taken them years, to put these together, to revise the rituals and to get all these characters, doing all these certain things. So I decided to write a ritual as part of my research to find out, was it easy, was it hard, how long did it take? So I wrote a ritual for the Hermetic Brothers of Egypt, and it was basically one of those stories where you write it on the back of a a fag packet or something, a cigarette packet, or I just did it in one night, and I thought, oh, it's quite easy, that really, I was quite good. So it was a bit of an experiment, to see how they tackled these orders, and where they dipped into the Old Testament to get their stories and to get their kind of themes developed. So I showed that to Robert Lomas. Yeah, some of you might be familiar with Robert Lomas, the author, and he liked it, and he said, "Oh, just put it out." So I did. But to me, it was just like an experiment. And but going back to the Zuzzamites again were it's a very Victorian ritual. When you read it, it's kind of enriched by these kind of Oriental themes and Egyptian, Greek mythology all kind of mixed in, and Old Testament stuff, and they've created these characters and these themes, and it's amazing what they did, really. But yeah, the Zuzzamites, I've got some more information on them, so if you want to email me, I can send you the article that I wrote. I think it was for a magazine last year, and I've got some details on it as well for the ritual that was published by the Grand College of Rites, so you could get that as well. It's fascinating, really is.
That's really fascinating, David. Thank you very much indeed. Nakeem, back over to you, please.
Yeah, last question, very short. Do you know, David, the degree system? Because I'm the Grand College of Rites, so I want to know, like, how is it lined up? The system is apprentice, companion. How is it lined up?
How was the
Zuzzamite ritual?
Oh, the Zuzzamite ritual.
Right. I want to see the word. I mean, I always find the history, but I want to see how the degrees are set up. I want to see if the word I'm getting. That's all.
Right. What I'm probably best doing, because I'm going to be working off memory now. So but it's quite a complex ritual system, really. And it's got a group of you know, kind of degrees, if you could call them that. So if you could get my email, and then I can email you back with some information on it. That's probably the best bet. Because it is very, very, very complex, and I'm working off memory, so I'd probably end up getting some things wrong with this. But to be doubly sure, it'd be best to email you with some information on that.
Can you just maybe possibly are you able to just cross-reference, like, what's the concept? I mean, I got 98 degrees. I'm a Gnostic. All that, those schools of thoughts. So I want to see. Yeah. I want to see it is something that, you know, is different than what I'm already involved with, and I can connect because I'm a member of Grand College of Rights in the U.S.
Oh right, yeah. It was published about 10 years ago, I think. The ritual, but yeah, it was. It's what you probably call pseudo-Masonic, if you like, or non-Masonic. It's a non-Masonic order, and by the way, that's how they probably got away with a lot of things, because a lot of these orders are non-Masonic. They're Oriental in content, if you like, because the Orientalism of the time, you know, the Victorian period was quite rich. You know, people loved Egyptian stuff and Indian stuff, you know, from the continent of India, and, you know, with the British Empire and all this kind of stuff. The themes really cross over with the British Empire and Orientalism. But with the Zuzzamites, again, you know, there's a flavor of Orientalism, if you like. There's it's still structured on like a lodge system as well, but it's clearly non-Masonic. So I can't remember how many degrees exactly there are, and it's very, very long-winded. Some degrees are shorter than others, and again, it's literally about a journey. You know, it's a journey about the adept, kind of, you know, this journey of discovery. So it is based on similar themes, you know, to other degree structures, if you like, other esoteric orders. You know, it's all about discovery, self-discovery, and yeah. But if you get my email from the organizers, then I will email you back with the detail of the ancient orders of the Zuzzamites.
David, maybe if you're comfortable doing so, maybe you could pop your email address just in the chat for people to copy and paste if they want to communicate with you directly.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
I'll
and I also, while you're doing that, I have just a quick question. Of the non-Masonic orders that you mentioned, do you know if any of them were both open to both men and women?
Yeah, there were. As an interesting sidestep, Yarker became deeply interested in co-Masonic orders. Towards the end of his life, he started to champion, really, you know, Freemasonry for men and women, and he corresponded with a number of lady Freemasons, if you like, and well, lady co-Masonic Freemasons, and he became involved in there was a couple of orders, I think, that did admit women, and certainly now his orders are or can be co-Masonic. The orders that exist now, which aren't mainstream Masonic orders, or, you know, they collectively you know, contain his orders, you know, like the Pansophic rites that I mentioned, and some, you know, some other grouping of orders, they do admit women. So I think the reason why he got involved in that was because by that time he had three sons and three daughters. His infant son, as I mentioned in the paper, died in 1862, and subsequently his two other sons passed away before Yarker died. That left him with three surviving daughters, and in his will, he does mention that one of his daughters, I think it was Edith, his eldest daughter, she might have seemed to have held a bit of an interest in Freemasonry, maybe because it was an interest, or maybe she was trying to please her father, or who knows. And he did leave a statement in his will just to say that if his eldest daughter was interested in joining co-masonry, then she could have all his ritual books and some of his Masonic books. So yeah, he was open towards women in Freemasonry, and probably women in his orders much later on, towards the end of his life. Maybe he was opening up towards that. And indeed later on, when the Duke de Palatine had the Pansophic rights and had the ownership for this ancient and primitive rite, he did accept women into the orders. So it was one of those things that progressed, from the Victorian era onwards.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Peter, you've raised your hand. Thank you for your patience, Peter. I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm quite happy to wait on such an interesting discussion. I've got a question about Yarker's interest in Rosicrucianism before he joined the SRIA. Is there any evidence that he researched the Rosicrucian current or was particularly interested in it?
It's a good question, really. He was obviously interested in any form of esoteric thought, or any form of alternative mystical ideas, really. The thing with Yarker is that he saw everything joined up anyway. If you read Arcane Schools, which I think is a fantastic book, really. I mean, obviously historically it's not, it's not got its accuracies, but it's great for delving into the mind of John Yarker. And he saw everything coming from potentially a source. He saw all these esoteric streams related. So I believe that Rosicrucianism was just one part of this tree, if you like, that Yarker envisioned, along with other ideas, where like, for example, he was interested in older religions and trying to source these religions and how these mystical schools, if you like, these arcane secret schools were passing down secret knowledge to various different channels and streams. So certainly I believe that Rosicrucianism was just one of many of those streams that held an interest for him, and so much so that he joined the SRIA, and obviously he enjoyed it, and he found that much more, gave him much more of a passion, to continue things and to research things. So yeah, that's all I can say with that, really, is that he saw it as one of many streams. And he did go back, in arcane schools, and there was all these ideas that he had on the old religions and mystical sects and things like this, like the Bektashi and all of these kind of Oriental ideas that he had from India, and they all seem to converge. And if you read Arcane, I don't know if you've read Arcane Schools or dipped into it, or but he does mention Rosicrucianism in the Arcane Schools, you know, as part of this wider, larger concept, you know, of how all these streams are connected.
Thank you once again. Brig, over to you, please.
Thank you, Shane. David, surely he must have been very well aware of the bursting on the scene in 1875 by Madame Blavatsky and occult of the Theosophical Society, which was swiftly followed, as you're well aware, in 1902 by Annie Besant, bringing co-Freemasonry from France into Britain. Is there any indication that he was heavily influenced by these two streams?
Oh yeah, well, Blavatsky, in her work, is it Isis Revealed?
Yes.
Yeah. She quotes John Yarker direct.
Isis Unveiled.
Yeah. I was nearly there. It's been a long day.
Nearly there.
nearly there. Yeah. She quotes Yarker direct in the work, and if you've got a PDF copy, just type in Yarker, it'll get you straight to it, and it's a fantastic quote where Blavatsky praises Yarker. She was one of the first renowned international esoteric commenters, shall we say, that quoted Yarker, and she developed a relationship with him. And Yarker gave her honorary membership into the adoptive right as a result, and kind of bonded the relationship. And so yeah, he was well aware of Blavatsky. He liked her, and obviously liked what she said about him, and she liked him. She praised him. In relation to Annie Besant, I'm not so sure about Annie Besant, but there were a number of female co-masons that he struck up a corresponding relationship with. He did end up supporting co-masonry in the end, and at the end of his life, towards the end of his life, along with the operatives as well. You'd probably heard of the operatives. He was that all kind of crossed over at this kind of time, and so yeah, he was fully aware of co-masonry. He was aware of you know, these co-masons, these, you know, women that also ventured down the esoteric pathway as well. So yeah, he was the thing with Yarker is that he corresponded with so many people. You know, the list, I could be here all afternoon just reeling off the people that he corresponded with. Fascinating character. He was a central character, and one of the things I found writing this biography, I'd heard that there was some other people that had tried to write a biography of Yarker, and they were finding it difficult, and that I found it difficult as well, because it wasn't a linear path. It was more like spokes from a wheel, you know, kind of with Yarker in the middle and all these kind of spokes coming out of it. And I mean, he wrote all these works, pamphlets and books, and rituals and things like that. He was involved in all these orders. He had this really rich early life, which we've heard about today, or partly heard today. His career in Freemasonry, and obviously, you know, fringe masonry, as some people have termed it, and also after his death, the way all these orders were basically taken away and changed and adapted and still with us today, you know. So it's a fascinating story. But yeah, going back to the original question, yeah, he was quite supportive of co-masonry towards the end. Corresponded with some members, and indeed his wife, Yarker's widow, because of his work in co-masonry and supporting it, and I think they took some of his library when he died, when he passed away in 1913, and because of that, Yarker's widow was on a pension from the co-masons. You know, until she died in 1922, I think it was. So, you know, there was a strong relationship there anyway, you know, towards the end. But yeah, he knew Madame Blavatsky quite well. So.
Yeah, many thanks, David.
Yeah, thank you.
Just as a brief personal comment, I would say that rather than the women like Besant and Blavatsky, and I would say Dion Fortune as well, rather than that they wandered along or wandered down the esoteric path, they were positively superior guiding lights for us men. Very much so.
Oh yeah, very much so, yeah.
And I've been looking as well at some information about publications or things, writings of Yarker, and there's something that stands out to me, and I wondered if you know anything about this particular writing. Just let me see if I can find it again. Where is it? Just one second. It's got a very curious title. Yes, it's co-written, I think, by someone called Villars de Montfaucon and John Yarker. Submundanes, or the Elementaries of the Cabal, being the history of spirits. Do you know anything about that? It's a very curious title.
Yeah, I believe, again, I'm just working off memory here, but Yarker was in the 1890s. He was working with the publisher in Bath, which is in the west of England, for those of you that are residing elsewhere. But this particular publisher was very much into esoteric works and occult works, and he used Yarker as because Yarker was translator of French. Yarker, I believe, translated that one. There was quite a few of those. In fact, I think I mentioned one in the paper. If I can find it again, just bear with me a second. I think it's at the very end. Yeah, the assistant genies and irreconcilable gnomes.
That's a curious title as well.
Yeah, which is translated. I believe 2 volumes of that. So
wow.
Yeah. So yeah, he was very active. I mean, his list of works is amazing, really. I mean, he self-published a lot of stuff as well, and he published some. I think it was John Hogg in London, who was you know, a good publisher for occult stuff and you know, esoteric Masonic stuff. He published things in Manchester as well. So yeah, you know, he got about a bit, you know, in regards to publishing works. Yeah, I mean, he's a fantastic character, really. You know, really an essential character. You know, if you're looking at the history of the SRIA and history of esoteric Freemasonry, the occult revival. And if you're very much into these kind of esoteric streams that sometimes referred to as fringe Freemasonry or collective non-Masonic orders that still exist, you know, he was behind them, you know, again, the OTO is been described as a linchpin of the OTO by I think it's Richard Kaczynski, who wrote the biography of Crowley. So yeah, it's a real essential. Yarker is a real essential character, in esoteric occult history.
In your opinion, why do you think it is that him and Albert Pike didn't get on?
Well, Albert Pike was obviously pushing for the Scottish Rite and had redeveloped that, and well, effectively had relaunched that, especially the southern jurisdiction. And along comes John Yarker, who's not only in control of the ancient and primitive rite, which is seen as a kind of rival in a way, even though the ancient primitive rite was obviously classed as fringe Freemasonry or on the outskirts, or I mean, it could have developed into a stronger rival, but he wasn't just in charge of that. He was also involved with the Curnew Scottish Rite, the ancient and accepted rite. So now that was seen as more of a danger to the Scottish Rite in the States, So Yarker was probably this, this seen as this big bogeyman. I think Nick Kim mentioned this in one of his early questions, and hence this kind of clash. And the thing with Yarker was that he wasn't an academic, and one of his faults really was kind of reading all kinds of different things and taking it as read without having this academic critical way of thinking. So Yarker would then go ahead and publish a pamphlet or something, and his history wasn't that great. His quotations, his references weren't that great. And so when he was discussing, the ancient and primitive rite, the history of it, and when he was discussing Cernew's ancient and accepted, the version of the ancient and accepted rite, obviously his history wasn't great, and so this upset Pike, who also saw it as a rivalry, perhaps, or maybe a developing rivalry, because at the end of the day, Masonic organizations about membership, and if they were to lose membership to these organizations, these spurious organizations as they saw them, then it was their right to educate members and say, oh, you don't want to join them, this is where it is, this is the right, the right thing to join, not that.
Yeah, I find that very interesting. It kind of reminds me of the Life of Brian, where they're talking about the People's Popular Front of Judea.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, you
Sad,
get
that competitive thing.
Oh yeah. You get that in many societies. I mean, I'm a member of a history society which wants to restore a canal in the northwest of England, and there's always arguments amongst the committee, and some of them, oh, I'm going to form my own society. I'm going to go off and form my own society. And so they'd have to be called something slightly different than ours or something, And
that's exactly what I meant.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah. And of course, with the ancient and primitive rite, having 33 degrees, a condensed version of Memphis Mizraim, which was supposed to rival, the ancient and accepted rite, with its 33 degrees. So obviously there was going to be a clash, and hence I think why Yarker's, especially in America, has been pushed aside, as this kind of crazy kind of fringe Masonic guy, but that doesn't mean to say that he holds vital importance, and in England, we think of matters in a slightly different way in regards to Freemasonry and these kind of non-Masonic orders or fringe orders or whatever you want to call them, and so his memory lasted longer, and well, still lasts to this day. His importance to other orders and to the esoteric way of thinking, still lasts to this day.
Thank you very much, David. Does anyone else have any questions or any comments for David? Please, if you do so, feel free to speak or raise your hand and just let me know. Anybody in London at the Atlantis bookstore?
Hi, Sheen. No, we've gone off on some interesting tangents from David's original discussions, and just so we don't have any particular questions, but we've had some questions on the meaning of life have been flowing around the bookshop. But
Hey.
Thank you very
good.
much for that wonderful presentation. It has certainly inspired some lively conversation here at the bookstore today.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, that's what it's all about anyway. That's
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone in London. And anyone else before maybe we wrap up for today? If anyone has any questions, just raise your hand or just speak up, please.
Yes, I would like to say, David, you've done a great job. Thank you. Brought some things back to my memory, That's some new things. It's excellent. I'd like to also add on to say that if you don't know, the Rite of Memphis is co-ed, men and women, right? Some places in America, because of the European influence with the landmarks, a lot of Black Masonic organizations, like Masonic congresses, about 5 of them. One of them, well, it's about 8 Grand Lodges in that Congress. They adopted the Yorker's primitive adopted right. So I met with them on Zoom regarding a member of mine who just left them. They was calling it Memphis and Miss Ram. And I said, totally separate. It's not recognized over here. And I want to say that. And also I want to speak on France. I was in Paris, France. Jack is his name. He has the Rite of Memphis and Miss Ram over there. And some of my members I brought from here to over there to be initiated. And it's one thing definitely in America is about looking good. The years, the cufflinks. I have all that, right? Even when I displayed my Memphis Miss Ram materials to France, it was so they still believe, and it's true, that America is more into the good shine and the good boys, and some of the esoterics. And I already had 97 degrees, and some of my members went through it in Paris, France, about 4 of them, 2 sisters and 2 brothers. And they came back and never had an experience before. They said, over here in the US, y'all haven't had real masonry yet, and to my experience also, America craft masonry or Main Street masonry is more form and ceremony. In France, it's more spiritual, it's more esoteric. You feel the ceremony in the process, so I must say definitely that they're very much so on point, and I wish that part was in America. I think that's why a lot of the Prince Hall and Mainstream and other Masonic organizations from them, they're losing membership because that part is lacking,
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, with that really. Yeah, I mean, it's there's I often talk about this to fellow Freemasons, and there's this big kind of gap. This is my opinion, of course. But there's this big gap missing in regular Freemasonry, which is about education.
Yes.
And when I joined Freemasonry, it was all about you know, it was hierarchical. You had to learn your ritual. If you didn't learn it, don't turn up, you know, this kind of stuff. I've seen it all, you know, and you know, and going into to dining, you know, your knife and forks in the right place, and you know, it's all set out right, and
Yes.
and you don't pick up the wrong fork, or you know, you don't pick up the you know, the soup spoon, you know, too early, you know, whatever, you know, there's all kinds of etiquette. There was a lot of emphasis on that, and a lot of emphasis on you know, what your job was and all this kind of stuff, and what car you had, and you know, all these discussions. And I think back to Yarker, and I think obviously, I mean, cars weren't around then, but Yarker still was sat at a similar festive board, and he was hearing these kind of conversations with his fellow brethren, you know, oh yeah, you know, I just bought this house, oh yeah, I've just had a, you know, the tailor-made suit, you know, and all this kind of materialistic stuff that wasn't appealing to Yarker. Yarker wanted the spiritual, he wanted the esoteric, and I personally believe that he was so sick and tired of that, that he thought, this isn't what I want out of Freemasonry anymore. This isn't what I need. And 1862 was probably a bit of a poor year for him anyway, you know, obviously the loss of his son and economically, and I think he probably thought, right, that's it, I'm out of it, you know. And he resigned from the two lodges that he was in, Royal Arch and Mark, you know, he just got out of there, and he kept on with the Knights Templar for a while until that fell into a bit of a conflict with his esoteric interests later on. But yeah, you know, it's the same thing. You know, I think he desired something else. You know, he wanted something else. He wanted the spiritual. He wanted the esoteric, and he'd had enough of this kind of, you know, materialistic discussion and middle class Freemasonry, and you know, he'd had enough of it. You know. So yeah.
David, last question on actually, Dave, if you don't mind. Are you going to do something on Saint Germain? And I have that question because I was charted by Agha Rabaka, the late Rabaka out of Israel. It's the U.S., it's in Croatia, was in Ukraine, it's in Israel. So I was charted to the U.S. for Saint Germain Order. And I know about it for what they have informed me of, the triangle ritual, you know, right? Malachi Hall, right? But he was out of France, you know, he's out of Europe, you know. And when I saw the Great Hierophant, he knew I was head of the Saint Germain order. He saw Saint Germain to be, as always among many, a fable, kind of like, you know.
Yeah. Count Saint Germain.
Right, Count Saint Germain. Yeah. Would you do anything on him in the future? Because I want to hear.
I would love to kind of you know, do something more on, you know, these kind of figures. You know, I mean, my kind of background is academic, and you know, I've done a string of books on
Gotcha. All right.
More lately, you know, more kind of esoteric stuff, really. You know, the Rite of 7 Degrees was like my last big one, and Lost Rites and Rituals of Freemasonry, but yeah, I'd love to do something kind of controversial and spiritual and mythical, you know, and Count Saint Germain is a fascinating character that verges on myth and kind of meanders in and out of history, and you know, I'd love to do something on him, really. I did mention him in my first book because when I was doing my first book, which was my PhD, his name kept on coming up, you know, and I thought, oh, I'm just going to put his name in, you know, because people that I spoke to, and when I was researching very early on, you know, his name was coming up, and I can remember having a great conversation with a guy from the University of Liverpool, where I did my PhD, he was more fascinated. He was a tutor, history tutor, an 18th century history tutor, you know, based on the French Revolution, you know, was his speciality really, and obviously Count Saint Germain pops up in there, you know, and so he was mentioning him all the time, and we had this conversation about him, and I thought that his name's got to go in the work here, you know, because it was really fascinating. I mean, and the fact that he's attracted Freemasons and you know over the decades, and alchemy and all this kind of spiritual stuff, and the fact that he supposedly lived, you know, for
he
centuries.
He taught Cagliostro, and he was friends with
Cagliostro, yeah. Well, I've discussed him in my book, the Lost Rites and Rituals of Freemasonry. He took up quite a part of that. Again, a fascinating figure from the same time, and again with Cagliostro. I mean, his real name was Giuseppe Balsamo, and he was like an Italian trickster, basically. He was a con man in a way, you know, and and he kind of meandered, you know, through this, weaving through these circles of
the magic mirror,
high society, especially in Paris. When he went to England, he visited a lodge in England, in London, and they ridiculed him. He turned up in this kind of flamboyant military uniform, I think it was, and they actually ripped into him. You know, they really ridiculed him, and he stormed off. So I think he was expecting a better audience in England, but in England, you know, they don't tend to like people that pretend to be a, you know, a count or somebody, or a you know, false pretenses, you know, shall we say. So it's strange that Cagliostro had success in Paris, but when he came to London, he was ridiculed and sent packing, you know. But yeah, another flamboyant character, you know, worthy of a good biography, and you know, Freemasonry seems to attract some of these characters really, and you know, so it's worth looking at sometime.
Okay, I'll email you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you very much, Nakeem. I have a question in the chat here from Adina. The question is, did John Yarker make explicit use of Neoplatonic principles in his approaches?
Neoplatonic principles? Possibly, yeah. I mean, I'd refer to the arcane schools, and which I did touch on previously to a previous question, where everything kind of overlaps in Yarker's mind. All these esoteric streams and all these, you know, Rosicrucianism and the Druids and the Chaldees and all these kind of strange concepts, you know, these mystical sects of Islam, like the Bektashi, and all of these ideas and all of these thoughts kind of were linked together. You know, these streams were kind of converging, and you know, the arcane schools is basically Yarker's view on how this lost knowledge was, or this hidden knowledge, shall we say, was passed down these kind of schools, and Freemasonry was just one of them, and the Neoplatonists was again just one form of these kind of collective ideas, you know, that were reformed and passed on, you know. You know, it's worth reading Arcane Schools, you know, and you can get it online for free. You can get a PDF of it. You can download a PDF of it and check it through. But yeah, I mean, Yarker was kind of engulfed in ideas, he's very spiritual. His concepts were, you know, he was always searching for something. He always looked deeper, you know, into things, and hence Freemasonry, regular Freemasonry, couldn't contain him, you know, for too long. He was off on something else, and he wanted to look deeper through the glass, you know, and so yeah, he was open to many ideas, you know, so it's worth reading Arcane Schools, definitely. Recommended.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, David. Kristen, you've had your hand up for some time. Thanks for your patience. Go ahead.
Let's see. There we are. Okay. Yes, Saint Germain was brought up, and it's kind of late, so this would probably be a quick answer, but I was just wondering, according to Rudolf Steiner, the esotericist, and I was always curious whether this was just his knowledge of seeing, or if this is common knowledge. That's basically my question. Rudolf Steiner said that Saint Germain, the soul who was Saint Germain, included, he was also Christian Rosenkreuz, and John the Baptist and Elijah were some of the others, and one of the main Renaissance artists. Is this common knowledge? That,
well, it depends on the interpretations, but it's a good point you've raised. I'm briefly going to do a little detour and go back to what I mentioned in a previous answer to someone's question about I think it was Nakim again who was talking about the Illuminati, but F.G. Irwin, who was Yarker's friend and fellow member of the Society of Eight, he came up with this new order called the Frater Lucis, and it was based on the fact that he'd, through mediumship, through spiritualism, had contacted a number of deceased past masters, who included Count Cagliostro and Martinez Pasquale and a number of others. I'm not sure if, I mean, I'm working off memory, I'm not sure if Count St. Germain was amongst the deceased masters, but what they were conveying was that this order, Frater Lucis, was basically half deceased masters and half living, you know, which obviously would have included Irwin and Yarker and Mackenzie and all these other occult revivalists. So it's this fantastic collective of souls that were living and souls that were that had passed over. And so your question reminds me of that, really, that it's basically, you know, we are one of one soul. We are of one, you know, these seekers of truth and seekers of cosmic consciousness, shall we say, you know, the desire to achieve cosmic consciousness. They explain that it's a oneness, a feeling of oneness, you know, with God, that we are of one. We are one entity. We are just pieces of that one entity. So, in a way, yeah, you know, I can see how Steiner kind of was relating that, you know, that this soul is the same, and you could interpret that as being reincarnated, or perhaps as part of this oneness, you know, that some certain seekers are aware of this, you know. So yeah, very interesting question. Yeah, so that would be my answer to it at the moment, you know, but yeah, excellent question, really.
Okay. Yeah,
Yarker was, sorry, go on.
Oh, Steiner implied that this was the soul, you know, the same soul, the reincarnated Saint Germain was also Christian Rosenkreuz, which I always found fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously he would be writing about something that he felt rather than writing about something in an academic way, you know, where he had proof of it. But it was more of a, it seems that Steiner, you know, was writing about how he felt and how he felt about the soul and reincarnation. And Yarker also wrote about the monks of Tibet, you know, and so he was aware of that in a way, you know, or possibly aware of it, shall we say, you know, because it was obviously the first decade of the 20th century. Again, that kind of theme of Orientalism and spiritual search and it was something that he probably may have been aware of, you know, in regards to, again, you know, the soul and spiritualism. He did believe that people passed on to the other side and their spirits were still around and could be contacted, you know, because he was involved in spiritualism, and he in his work, The Genealogy of Yarker, genealogy of the surname Yarker, he it's basically like a family history, collective family history, and he got his proof by a spiritualist. He contacted his mother, his deceased mother, and she apparently gave him all this information about his past family. So he believed in that, and he believed in it so much that he actually wrote about it and put it down. And so he did believe in the soul, and he did believe in spirits, and obviously he worked on books about spirits and things like that. So yeah, you know, it would have been something that he probably did, or, you know, did concern him in some way. Definitely.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Kristen. Anybody else before we wrap up for today? Any questions or comments for David, please? Go ahead.
I'm going to jump up very quick. I was actually now because I had to leave. But yeah, thanks a lot for the presentation. Very nice. It's a topic I didn't know anything, so it's very, very nice. I'm very happy. I also like a lot, Sheen, you brought up the topic of Masonry, and I just wanted to say that I would love to hear more about this. So I think that it would make a great topic for one presentation, one of these meetings, and that's it. So. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sophia.
Probably would, yeah. I mean, yeah. If you want me to do another one about Yarker's, probably we've done one about Yarker's early life, maybe one about Yarker's later life, which is equally as fascinating because he was involved in the formation of the operatives. If anyone's familiar with the operatives, again, it's a fascinating story, and that crossed over to his interest in co-masonry. There was a very kind of vibrant esoteric exchange in correspondence between Yarker and the other founder of the operatives, Clement Stretton, and the co-masons. You know, some lady co-masons, you know, that were involved in the exchange. So yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating topic, really, and worthy of you know, another presentation at some point. Definitely. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I'm just making a point of making a note here of Adina has put something in the chat that's very, very interesting. Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to make sure that I copy the link that you sent. I'll investigate that after.
So I've got my email as well in the chat. I think you can scroll down the chat, just get my email if you want to get in contact, and I can send you some relevant information that connects to the questions, and The biography itself of John Yarker will be out April, May, I believe, with Lewis Masonic, The Life and Death of John Yarker. If anybody's interested in the Hermetic Brothers of Egypt, that's available on Amazon. That's my experiment on one of Mackenzie and Yarker's titles for an order that never really got off the ground, and that's available on Amazon. And yeah, it'd be great to drop by sometime and check out some of the other presentations, and perhaps maybe do something on Yarker again.
Thank you very much, David. We did have Brig put his hand up again. Do you want to just jump in there, Brig, before we finish?
Yeah, well, I was just going to take up on Sophia's point about co-Freemasonry, not specifically with regard to Yarker. But yes, I think it would be a fascinating presentation if we could attract someone perhaps like Julian Rees to speak about Le Droit Humain, and possibly on Charles Webster Leadbetter, who wrote an interesting tome on Freemasonry and his alleged spiritual recollections of a previous incarnation in Egypt. And I'm sure Yarker was possibly aware of some of these speculations.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you should say that, because I do mention Yarker in the book. Sorry, I do mention Leadbetter in the book. And Leadbetter was when Yarker died, Leadbetter seemed to have had an interest in the ancient and primitive rite, and Aleister Crowley actually journeyed up to Manchester to sort out a meeting that occurred after Yarker's death, because there seems to be a bit of a power grab after Yarker's death for the title of Grand Hierophant for the rite. And Crowley made a bit of an essay out of his visit in Manchester in his journal, The Equinox, which is quite famous. Some of you might have read it, might have come across it. but Leadbetter does feature in the biography. Yeah, that's an interesting little connection.
David, thanks for that. We know nothing.
Right, okay, right. Oh, well, there you go then. That could be something for the future.
Thank you very much, Brig. And one last little question here we have in the chat. Is there any relation between Yarker and any so-called clandestine Masonic groups?
Clandestine Masonic groups? What, in the present day?
I don't know. The person didn't specify.
Oh, right. Because
yes, in the present day.
Yeah, yes. The term clandestine has actually been around for quite a while, but it depends what you term as clandestine, you see, because we don't really use that term in England. In the UK, it's really an American term.
Does that imply excluded? Frowned?
Yeah, well, for example, clandestine, it's to do with like Masonic orders that are connected to, unrecognized. They're not recognized by the Grand Lodges in the US. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, with the orders that are existing today, the ones that are still surviving could be classed as non-Masonic, like the Sat Baha'i, the Swedenborgian Rite, a few others perhaps that Yarker was involved in, a few other orders that he was involved in. The only one that is Masonic really is the Ancient and Primitive Rite, which is basically the condensed version of
everything else,
and Kernio's Ancient and Accepted. So yeah, in a way, he probably was involved in some clandestine orders,
Absolutely.
looking at the fact that it's an American term, or commonly used American term, then you know, it's a complicated answer to a complicated question, because you don't want to offend anybody, do you? You know, you don't want to say, oh yeah, you know, that's whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting history anyway. You know, the way clandestine is perceived, the concept of it, you know, is very interesting. I mean, that's a paper within itself, I would think. But a short answer would be possibly, yeah, Yarker was involved in the Kernio rite, and you know, the ancient and primitive rite, which is seen as a Masonic rite that isn't recognized really by Grand Lodges in the States. So, yeah, there we go.
Thank you once again, David. Unless anybody has anything else they'd like to say or ask or comment or offer, then I'd like to maybe just hand over to you, David, if you've got any last remarks or anything you'd like to say.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed the paper. It's a paper that's going to be published by, if you just bear with me a second, if we can get to the front page, it's going to be published in the Transactions of the Cumberland and Westmoreland Antiquarian and Archaeological Society this year, later this year, which is quite nice, because that was the transactions that Yarker was discussing by the Reverend Joseph Whiteside, in regards to the bygone days of Shap in Cumbria. So that's quite a nice little home for it, really, and it's quite an academic transaction. But once it is published in there, and I think it's going to be out in a few months' time, I will put it on my academia site, and if anybody's interested, feel free to email me, and I will send you the link to my academia site, and you can download my papers there for free as a PDF. So and if anybody's interested in the paper, I can send it over anyway via an email. But the book will be out, the biography will be out April, May with Lewis Masonic, and yeah, there's subsequent papers going to be published as well from it in various different transactions. So but yeah, thank you for inviting me on, and thanks for listening. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Great array of questions there, really thought-provoking, and I've really enjoyed it. So thank you very much, and hope to be back again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, David. So on behalf of the Metropolitan Study Group of the SRAA, thank you for today. Thanks to everybody who has attended this meeting. I'm just going to shift the view so we have the gallery view here to see everybody, and everybody around the world. So it's a wonderful gathering of like-minded souls. And yeah, lots of love to you all. Have a great start to 2024. And I look forward to seeing you next month.